Harry's wife shared. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, helping you understand more about the mindset of Harry's wife and how it impacts upon her primary victim, Harry. Harry's wife essentially lives in a form of a fantasy world. This has been generated by her narcissism. In order to create a coping mechanism to defend her against threats to control, her narcissism came into being. How might this have occurred? Well, as I've explained in my excellent video, What Makes a Narcissist, I'll give you a brief run through now. There has to be two aspects. She has to have a genetic predisposition, if you like, the seed, the cake ingredients to become a narcissist. And that invariably has to come from another narcissist somewhere in the family lineage. Often it's the parent, but sometimes it could be grandparent and even further back. Here, she had the double whammy. For both her parents are narcissists, both Doria and Thomas, in different ways. And therefore, there was always going to be a strong chance that the genetic predisposition would be implanted in her. And indeed, it came to pass that that was the case. However, it's not enough just to have that genetic predisposition. There also has to be a lack of control environment that the would-be narcissist is subjected to in those formative years of childhood. Sometimes that lack of control environment is being physically abused or sexually abused, or with an emotionally distant parent or parents. It might be neglect, where the child is left to fend for themselves. It might be what I call grade B syndrome. That's where the child achieves, but it's never good enough. You score 2 goals, why not 3? You got 75% in your examination, why didn't you get 85%? You came third, why did you not win? And so on and so forth. They climb the hill, and there's always one beyond. Sometimes it's not necessarily a bad environment as such. A gilded environment can be just as problematic because this takes away the child's notion of control over their own lives. So, accordingly, a child whose decisions are always made for them, perhaps by a helicoptering parent, or that they're given everything and told that they're remarkable, that they're special, even when they're actually not, creates a lack of control environment. There are lots of different kinds. With regard to Harry's wife, she had the genetic predisposition which she got from both her parents. She was then subjected to a lack of control environment. This, to my mind, seems to be twofold. The absence of her mother, who was about other things, and her overly doting father, who in effect took away the notion of control by treating her like a princess. And thus, in order to help her deal with this lack of control in her life, her narcissism was created. As she has become an adult, this narcissism, in effect, looks after her. It reminds her that she's the most important person in the universe. It tells her that she's right, and anybody else that disagrees with her is quite patently wrong. It causes her to believe, by virtue of being a mid-range narcissist, that she is a kind and decent and empathic person, that is only trying to help other people. It tells her that she is entitled to a life of luxury. It tells her that she is entitled to a life of worship and adoration because she's special, that she's brilliant. In effect, that she is this princess, that she was always destined to be one because she's elevated above everybody else, that she's special, that she's talented. And remember, the reinforcement of that from her father as part of the lack of control environment has lived on, echoing into her adulthood. Of course, many children are told that they're special and wonderful because in the eyes of their parent that they are. But describing the child as such does not take them within the realms of a lack of control environment. And even if it did, if there's no genetic predisposition towards narcissism alongside it, narcissism would not form. So that's why you might point to instances of a child who's been told that they're wonderful and amazing and special and golden, but they don't turn into a narcissist, because either that of itself was not a lack of control environment, or if it was, it didn't sit with a genetic predisposition, because you have to have both. For Harry's wife, she was absent a mother, which created its own issues, and also then have an overly doting father that told her that she was amazing, that she was special, that she was destined to greatness, that she was the princess. And that created the lack of control environment alongside the pre-existing genetic predisposition towards becoming a narcissist. So her narcissism has created, in effect, an alternative reality. But she doesn't realise this because it is her reality. Imagine, if you will, those of you that have watched The Truman Show, that until he had a moment of enlightenment, Truman believed that that was the real world for him. He didn't realise that he was in a show. He didn't realise that it was scripted. He didn't realise that the things that were happening around him were being generated and caused by other people. That to him was his real and actual world. Of course, he broke out from it, but a narcissist never does, because the narcissism always ensures that does not occur. So for Harry's wife, she has this fantasy world in which she exists, whereby she is the star of the story. As I mentioned in parts past, she hears a film track, a film soundtrack to her everyday activities, the things that she does, the things that she says. All of those instances take on this huge import that they are monumental, earth-changing, consequential matters. That everything she does ought to be recorded, ought to be noted, ought to be acknowledged, ought to be praised, not ought to be adored. And so she drifts through this world whereby everybody should do what she wants, although she doesn't necessarily see it that way, but that's the upshot of it all, that she's given what she needs, and that she's revered and praised. And that she doesn't understand that where the criticism is advanced towards her, that is fair and decent and constructive criticism. Her narcissism cannot accept that. She is not allowed to be criticised, because to be criticised is to threaten her sense of control. And thus, in essence, she has created this world where she is supreme ruler. And thus, as part of being propelled by this, she met Harry. And the narcissism dictated that he would make an ideal victim for reasons that I've set out elsewhere. In order to ensnare him, she needed to draw him into her fantasy so that they would share it. And therefore her narcissism picked upon the very things that would mean that he's susceptible to that. His low cognitive function, the various resentments that he has vis-à-vis his family, being spared, the treatment of his mother, his mental health issues, and caused her to utilise them to say, I understand you, I recognise what it's like to be on the outside, I support you. And Harry, they don't give you the worth, they don't give you the acknowledgement that you should have. They don't give you the respect that you deserve. And by making herself become indispensable to him, both in terms of giving him all of the sexual attention that rocks his boat, of appearing to be compassionate, of appearing to be his number one supporter, to treating him like the king that he believes that he ought to be, she makes herself indispensable. And in that, he believes that he's truly found someone ultimately so special for him. And that whilst William has Kate, he now has his Kate. That whilst his father has Camilla, he has his Camilla. That where he was always the one that was sort of the party boy and on the outside and couldn't really get anybody to buy into the lifestyle, she appeared to have done so. However, because that lifestyle of the royal family was in effect stronger than she was, namely the institution would not bow down to her and thus became a threat to her sense of control, her narcissism decided that she would have to retreat from it to assert control by withdrawal. But she had to keep hold of Harry. And the way to do so would be to draw him into the fantasy of her being the queen of all that she surveys, that they would set up their own kingdom elsewhere, albeit essentially a queendom, and that therefore he has to share in what she sees, namely that the royal family is racist, that the royal family was complicit in their bullying, that William is a distasteful individual who has just settled for somebody who has fitted the mould, whereas Harry has married for love, because that is more important, more virtuous, more noble. And as a consequence, she has had to cause Harry to become infected with her own fantasy world, whereby they are the victims, where they are the ones that have been bullied, where they are the ones that didn't do anything wrong, that they simply wanted to go and live their lives quietly and without intrusion, and they haven't been allowed to do so. If they had truly gone down that route, they could have been allowed to do so. They could have been allowed to go and live elsewhere, perhaps with a stipend that was enough for them to live on and for them to retreat from public view. But her narcissism will not allow that. What it wanted was the best of both worlds. It wanted to be able to on her terms, because that means she can assert control, but she also needed the things that the royal family provides: status, wealth, acknowledgement, access, networks, without all the responsibilities and obligations that go with it. In essence, she wanted the upside without the downside, because the downside would be a threat to control. And therefore, what she has done is create this fantasy world where it's the two of them against the rest of the world, that the rest of the world doesn't understand them, that they've married for love and nobody understands their form of love, that they have come away from the cold, institutionally racist, autocratic royal family and created their own bubble. All narcissists operate within their own bubble of the fantasy land that they've created in some shape or form, but invariably that primary victim has to be brought within it. And in essence, the fantasy that they have is a shared one. It is awful in its nature, for it is not the reality of any other people. And it is an awful fantasy for Harry, because it actually isn't in his best interests. He's just been duped into believing that it is. There will be occasions, there will be moments where holes are poked in that shared fantasy. An instance of that was the way that he looked at her when she was talking about the way that she was curtsying to the Queen. There was a reminder of the old world there for him. He'll have had plenty of those when he attended the Queen's funeral. But remember, Harry's wife's narcissism is attuned to these threats, and therefore will do its utmost to cut him off from the real world, for want of a better description, to keep him within this shared fantasy. And it's almost for a moment as if he pops his head out of the bubble and goes, oh, actually, there is a world outside of what she's created, and then all of a sudden one of her tendrils wraps around him and yanks him back inside, and he loses the cognition of what he's experienced, and he's back to swallowing all of the poison, all of the brainwashing that she has created, and keeps him within that deluded bubble. It is a shared fantasy, and for the time being, it largely works for him, because she has created this idea that it's the two of them against the world, that his mother was hounded to death by the paparazzi and was not protected by the royal family, and that could happen to her. And because he does genuinely love his wife, he doesn't want that to happen, and therefore he buys into the fantasy that she's created. He swallows the lies. Sometimes he chokes on them. Sometimes they don't quite go down. But she has to come along and hold him by the throat until he swallows them whole, and she will continue to do so. For as long as she is able to maintain a grip upon him, he will reside within the awful shared fantasy with her. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.